Hello, welcome to the Positive Posting Conversation, the show about how to have a better relationship with your dog and cat. I'm Zazie Todd, author of the books Bark, Wag and Purr, and creator of Companion Animal Psychology blog. My co-host, Christy Benson, is a dog trainer and anthropologist, and she also works at the Academy for Dog Trainers. We can't give advice on your pet, so if you have concerns, see your dog trainer, cat behaviourist, or veterinarian as appropriate. Thanks for joining us today. We know that animals are sentient beings, but what does it mean to say that they experience joy, empathy, and grief? This is a recording of the panel Animal Emotions with Marc Bekoff, PhD. It was recorded at BarkFest, the book festival for animal lovers, in September 2024. I organised BarkFest to celebrate the launch of my book Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful or Reactive Dog, which is out now. Enjoy this incredible discussion of animal emotions. Okay, well, we have a lot of people joined us, so I think we're ready to start. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm delighted to welcome you back to BarkFest. I see lots of names I've seen before and some new names too. So please let me know in the comments where you're joining us from, because it keeps being an international group and it's amazing to see where everybody is from. And before we get started, I have some housekeeping. So this event is being recorded and the recording will go out in 72 hours to give me time to check it. It takes a moment to process the recording. Everyone who is here live has the chance to win some books. So one person is going to win a copy of Marc's revised edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals, which everybody should have and read. Even if you read the first edition, you want the new one. And that's what he's here to talk to us about today. The winner will also get a copy of Dogs Demystified by Marc Bekoff. And if last week's session, you can go back and get the recording for that session. And also, because this is BarkFest, you have a chance to win a copy of my new book, Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful or Reactive Dog, which is full of tips for people with fearful dogs. And it was the impetus for BarkFest, and it's out next week. So we're joined today by Marc Bekoff. Marc is Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's published 31 books, or 41, depending how you count the multi-volume encyclopedias, and he's won many awards for his research on animal behavior, animal emotions, cognitive ethology, compassionate communication, conservation, and animal protection, and he's worked closely with Jane Goodall as co-chair of the Ethics Committee of the Jane Goodall Institute, and he's a former Guggenheim Fellow. He also works closely with inmates at the Boulder County Jail. In June 2022, Marc was recognized as a hero by the Academy for Dog Trainers, which Christy and I are thrilled about because we're both connected to the Academy of Dog Trainers. And his recent books include Canine Confidential, Why Dogs Do What They Do, Unleashing Your Dog, a field guide to giving your canine companion the best life possible, A Dog's World, Imagining the Lives of Dogs in a World Without Humans, Dogs Demystified, which we were lucky enough to talk to him about last week, and the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals, and also Jane Goodall at 90. And he also publishes regularly in Psychology Today. Marc, thank you so much for coming back to chat with us again.
Oh, welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. And my friends in Turkey, I just saw somebody. I'm sorry what's happening to your street dogs, but I've been working with somebody on the ground in Turkey about that terrible situation.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today mainly about the emotional lives of animals. And so can we go back to when you wrote the first edition of this book? Oh, you're quite right. I apologize. We need to pause for a photo. We're just going to pause for a photo. And if someone can tell me in the chat when you've got it, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And you can also get that from the recording if you need to.
Okay, I just need to do this because this is the birthday gift for Jane Goodall. Sorry, folks. There you go.
Awesome. And it's great to see the cover of that too. Thank you. And we're going to ask you about that towards the end as well. And we will have plenty of time for audience questions. So please put your questions into the Q&A box. Okay, so let's go back to when you wrote the first edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals, because the way we think about animals was very different back then. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to remember or even to realize how it was, because a lot of us with pets just automatically think that our pets experience emotions anyway. So when you first wrote this book, what were you hoping to do? What were you hoping to achieve with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, when I first wrote it, it started at 19 years ago, which is absolutely daunting to me. I just wanted to collect all the evidence about the emotional lives of animals, which is the title of the book, because I'm really I'm a biologist. I'm a behavioral ecologist. I do a lot of work on the evolution of behavior. And one of the main questions or one of the main dilemmas was that people were still talking about if animals had emotions. And I wanted to change the nature of the game from if they have them to yes, they have them. Why did they evolve? So as a biologist, I think of emotions as adaptations, very simple, to allow an individual to make decisions when they're facing different social or non-social situations. So that was one. And the other was I wrote a paper for Bioscience in 1999 where I introduced the idea of what I called the as if disclaimer. And that was along the same lines as, well, dogs are only acting as if they enjoy playing, or
Mm.
elephants are only acting as if they're grieving. And along the lines of that, about a couple months ago, I got an email from somebody saying, well, do we really know if dogs enjoy playing? And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, we know. And it was a nice email. So it wasn't one of the nasty ones. They said, well, how can I know dogs enjoy playing? And I said, go to a dog park. So that that was kind of easy to do. So that's why I wrote it. There was nothing at the time that really collected all the science and tons of stories. And I'd been thinking about it for a really long time. And when New World Library contacted me to do the book, it's like anything. I said, "Oh yeah," and then about a week later, I went, "What in the world did you get yourself into?" So anyway, it was a good journey, and thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I love how Zazie worded that question, because it's like things have changed a lot, and it would be odd now to not assume that the parsimonious statement was that animals had emotion. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you'd have to do all this extra to kind of show that they didn't now, I think.
Yes.
Which
Oh,
is, I mean, nice.
That's a great point, Kristen. Right. The arguments that people try to come up with that we don't really know something are so tortuous. They defy reality in terms of anybody who's watched animals. I mean, I'm an ethologist. I get paid to watch animals carefully. So no, that's a very good point. Yeah.
So I read the first edition, but long enough ago that it has drained out of my ear. So when I came back and read the second edition, it was very new to me, all of it. So what made you decide to write a second edition of this book?
Well, in another moment of weakness, I, I well, I write a lot for Psychology Today, and I had a lot of information there, but it was really to put to sleep you can fill in the blank, the stupidity of some people wondering whether animals still had emotion, whether animals have rich and deep emotional lives. So yeah, my publisher, New World Library, had asked me about 3 years ago, and I just said no because I had a lot of other books in the kitty, along with two I wrote with Jessica Pierce, Unleashing Your Dog and A Dog's World. But then I realized that I really wanted to do it. So the new editions, there's text from the old, but there's like about 300 new references. And once again, about halfway through, in another moment of weakness, I thought, I should just bag this. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just so obvious. You know what I mean? I'm just collecting, you know, but I'm really glad I did it. There's stronger arguments now, and it's really updated. It's not just in the United States to do a second edition of a book. It only has to be 20% new text or different. And this one is far more. And just as I was finishing, my publisher, for people who've published books, this, but if you haven't, my publisher said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Well, it's 25% longer than you wanted." and 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 they were great. They said fine, So I like it, actually, and I don't mean that in a self-serving way. I think it came out a lot better than I thought it would, because I thought it would be the same old, and people would read the boredom of trying to convince people that elephants grieve or dogs like playing.
Oh, I think it came out brilliantly well, and I'm so glad that you did a second edition. And a lot of it is new. It is very much updated, as you say. So obviously, when you were updating it, there was lots of new information that you could include, new stories to include as well. So which finding or piece of research made you especially happy that you could add it to this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I begin in the beginning, I got stories of grieving prairie dogs who I observed when I was out on a bike ride, and birds. The joy side of things, or the history of the study of animal emotions, was people really, really focused on negative emotions like fear and anger and hostility and aggression. It was the positive ones, that people sort of got a little antsy about. So it was interesting to just get a lot of interesting stories about grieving. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because such a wide variety of animals grieve, but also the ones about joy and play and the way animals play, because I've been studying play for a really long time. And it was a good example of going back to data I collected decades ago to come up with what I call the golden rules of play, where you ask first, you play fairly. If you overstep your bounds by biting too hard or slamming into another animal too hard or humping and mounting them, you apologize with a play bow, say if you're a dog, or a play gesture. So that was really good. The other was the neuroimaging, the non-invasive work that Gregory Burns and other people have done, because a lot of people will go, yeah, 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 I know my dog has these feelings, and I know that they have rich emotional lives, but the neuroimaging data have supported everything that people have reported from ethological research. So that was exciting. Yeah. And that could be the wave of the future for the few remaining dogmatic skeptics. But really, as I mean, I know Zazie knows well, there's no substitute for carefully watching animals and understanding their individual personalities and how they, as individuals, express their emotions.
So in the second edition, you write that it is no longer radical to recognize, respect, and want to protect the emotional lives of animals, which harkens back to what we were already started talking about, I think. So if we start with the recognize part, can you tell us about some of the changes that you've seen in how people recognize the emotional lives of animals in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, that's been really just one of the greatest aspects of redoing the book, collecting stories and talking to people about it. And so focusing on dogs, for example, I just get all these wonderful emails from people saying, I knew my dog had emotions, and they record them, they take videos. People go to dog parks, and they take pictures of their dog or images, and they'll send me the videos. And, so that's been really good. And one aspect of that is we learned so much about different aspects of animal behavior and animal emotions from citizen scientists. So I love when somebody describes something and then puts in a little video, into the email. But it's also done, and you all might know this better than I do, because I'm not a dog trainer and I really don't study human dog relationships. But I get the feeling over the years, as people learn more about the behavior of dogs and other animals, our wild neighbors, for example, they develop stronger and more positive relationships with them. They realize that they're sentient beings who have a view of the world, and they realize that how important that relationship is to the non-human. So, around my house, when I lived in the mountains, I had cougars and black bears and foxes and coyotes, and all the dogs on this country road. It wasn't really a road; it was just a dirt, thing that you hoped your car could get in and out of. But they would just hang out, and I learned a lot by just watching this group of free-ranging. They were really free-ranging when I was home, dogs. So that would be, to me, the most positive aspect of getting people to realize that when you become fluent in dog or dog literate, you can actually improve the relationship you have with your particular animal. And once again, getting back to individual differences that, littermates can vary from 0 to 180, just depending on who they are.
And I think that leads beautifully into our next question, which is about the respect and protect part of that sentence. So, using dogs as an example, or pet dogs, what does it mean to respect and protect the emotional lives of our pet dogs?
Well, it means to recognize them as sentient beings. It means to recognize their individual differences. It means to recognize that they have a view on the world and that we need to, pay really close attention to that, question, what is it like to be a dog? Back in the 70s, Tom Nagel, philosopher, wrote a really classic paper on what is it like to be a bat, because bats have such different motor and sensory systems. So that's what I tell people, especially people who decide they want to get a dog but have never lived with a dog, you know. And I actually have sent some people to some of the local dog parks before, especially first-time dog people, if you will, to just get a feeling for who the dogs are. And not a single one has regretted it. But what came out of it was this interesting, group of people who said, wow, I never really watched dogs. They really have rich emotional lives. They're really smart. And I don't think my lifestyle lends itself right now to getting a dog. And I find that, some people go, oh, well, that's a bummer, No, I found that to be really positive because they realize that getting a dog, especially a first-time dog guardian, would be a huge investment of time, energy, money, and flexibility. So I had not thought about that. And then, because, people say, well, would you come to the Boulder Humane Society or one of this? I said, I don't have the time to do that, number one. And number two, I don't know where you live, and I don't know I don't know your situation at home, So making them really feel the emotions of dogs and know that they care about what's happening to them could foster a much more negotiable, symmetrical relationship.
I love that. And I love the orientation towards allowing dogs to play with each other in dog park situations. And I think there's so much joy to be found in watching dogs play. I adore it when my dogs play. I try and do whatever I can to get my dogs to play with each other. And with me, I finally got the dog who's on the couch behind me, Archer. He wasn't really very playful with people, but I think I found the right movement recently that he started to play with me. So for one of the loveliest, go ahead.
Oh, no, you can, but that's great, over the years, because I had a lot of dogs and the few houses on the road, all the dogs would come down. So at any one time, there could be 4 to 7 dogs. And over the years, it could have been 30 or 40 different dogs. Is you learn that not only does each individual dog have their own temperament and personality, but they changed. I mean, just like we do as I want to say as they age, but it's not only that. It's sort of as they become more familiar with one another, So, humans will go, oh, that's Zazzy, oh, that's Christy, oh, that's Mark. And I can see these dogs going, oh, that's Jethro. He's just this whack job who this is what he does. And come to accept it, you know what I mean? And learn about the social dynamics of the group and then the individuals and how they change, And so a lot of observations that, inform my views of dogs were from this group of dogs who were there almost every day of the year, just hanging out. I would put food out in the fields around my house, like the size of a marble. And sometimes they would spend 5 hours looking for marble-sized food.
Wow.
And it enriched their lives. And they rarely ever, if ever, had collars or leashes when I was home, Yeah.
So I think like everybody on this call probably enjoys watching dogs play. And I think joy is such a great word to describe, what I think dogs are feeling and how I feel watching them. And I think all of us would love to go to a dog park with you, Mark. I know you were talking about people reaching out to you. And I love the way you interact with the people who do reach out to you. I think that's one of like the greatest things about you as an author. So let's imagine that could happen and we could all go to the dog park together. What kind of things would you be looking for and pointing out to us as, as dog trainers or as just interested dog guardians?
Well, I look at the way I mean, it depends on what the situation is when you get there, but I often got there early. And so as dogs were arriving, and I would, just, if you have a phone, I mean, a lot of this stuff was done by hand and just big cameras years ago, but, you know, pick a, do, first of all, do what we call focal animal sampling, just focus on an individual dog, see who they try to interact with or avoid, and who tries to interact with them or avoids them. And then all of a sudden, I mean, it's amazing how most like one of the running trails around here, the cycling trails where dogs are allowed, the multi-use trails and dog parks, you really see some very regular activity of, Joe gets there and he's used to seeing Sadie there. And when Sadie's not there, he will run around looking for Sadie. And, what's uncanny is how I know dogs don't have great distance vision, but how they know another dog and they just tend to be able to read who it is and what they want to do, and watch them group. And then, just pick a behavior in which you're interested. I mean, it's frenetic when you go to a dog park and you get there in the morning after most of them have been cooped up at night, how wired they are. And then have people, they'll say, well, I'm interested in whether my dog, Joey, is he an extrovert or an introvert? So I'd say, well, watch him. Does he try to initiate interactions? And how is he when other dogs try to initiate interactions with him? Is he picky? And these are the same questions that we asked, I mean, literally almost every day for 8.5 years when I studied wild coyotes in Wyoming. It's the same questions, You've got dogs who are free to run around. Yeah, they're constrained because there's a big fence around, and something constrains them at a dog park. And then just pick what you want. Are you interested in play dynamics? One woman said, my little dog's kind of nerdy and he just runs around he runs circles around groups of dogs playing. Why is he doing this? And I said, well, I don't know. So why don't you just watch him and see if other dogs invite him in, or how does he try to get into a play group? And a couple of months later, she said, yeah, I don't think she was great. She said, I don't think he's such a nerd. He just doesn't really realize how to play. He had been a rescue dog who had, so those are the kinds of questions. Just get out there and have fun. And as you said, Christy, I mean, watching play is contagious. I mean, I always want to jump in and, but I'm kind of, I'm cautious because I have thick skin for people who say nasty things to me, but my skin isn't thick enough to get into a wrestling match with a dog.
So we've been talking about joy now, but I think we should turn our attention to some of the other emotions that are mentioned in the title. And I wondered if you could give us an example of sorrow in non-human animals.
Well, sorrow is an interesting emotion. I mean, you could feel sorrow when you lose a friend, and part of the whole grieving scenario. But I use it also. So, for example, when getting back to play, when a dog bites another dog too hard, and there's I mean, the pause can be a few seconds or it can be a while until the dog who thinks they were attacked or were, being chased as food or were looking, was humped and mounted, gets over it and says, "Oh, I see you're just playing." So your question's a really good one because years ago when I looked at the placement of play bows in different sequences at different parts of sequences of play, I noticed when one dog, or we found the same in coyotes and wolves, was a little exuberant and bit too hard or slammed in too hard, there would be that momentary pause when they would maybe do a play bow or do another play signal to say, "I'm sorry." So that it's a it's a double-edged sword there, but in a positive way. sorrow it's complicated, and empathy. There's so many stories now of dogs helping other dogs, or being not only reading our emotions, but I think reading what other dogs want and need and what they're feeling. And I know people go, "Oh, we don't really know that." Yeah, I think we do. I think we're not. I'm not saying dogs sit down and do calculus. I'm not saying dogs have an oxytocin sensor in their nose, but I'm saying that dogs usually have a really good feeling for what another dog is feeling, and empathize. And there's good stories in my book about that.
Do you have any? Is there anything else to discuss about empathy when it comes to non-dog animals? Like, is that something that you've seen or heard about?
Oh, yeah, there's some good studies of chickens showing empathy for other chickens in need. I call it kind of the biodiversity of empathy. When people have looked for it in certain animals, they found it. And I don't mean they found it and it's not there. It never dawned on some people to think of chickens as being empathic, for example. You might have to recognize another individual. You might have to sort of feel what they're feeling. But, chickens apparently can remember 100 faces. So I don't think that it's going too far. I don't know about I can't imagine that it hasn't evolved across mammals and birds and, maybe even fishes. You know, as an ethologist, you just have to sit down. The first step is to develop an ethogram, we call it, a menu of the actions the animals use, and understand how they use them and what they mean, and it takes time. I mean, after 8.5 years and really about 5,000 hours of watching wild coyotes, we were still learning certain things. I mean, the learning curve asymptotes for sure, but towards the end of the study, I can't remember what it was, but a female did something. I don't remember exactly what it was that we had never seen before. And it was just, maybe it was a rare behavior, but it was still something they did. So.
And you have a lot of science in the book, but you also have a lot of stories that help to illustrate the science. And so I've been wondering, is one of those stories a favorite? Is there one that you would pick out and say there's one that's really your favorite story in the book?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, it's a good question. I love them all. I mean, I don't know about favorites. I mean, something that was really important, and it was in the beginning of the book, was the story of I was riding my bike up a road in rural Boulder, and I saw two prairie dogs in the road from a distance, and one of them just turned out to be a dead small prairie dog. I imagine it was a prairie dog's child, and another prairie dog who from size looked to be a female, I'm not quite sure, trying to pull the prairie dog off the road. And so I stopped, of course, and I got out my phone and I dictated exactly what was going on. And there was a cyclist ahead of me who had stopped, and I caught up to him and I asked him, "Did you see what I saw?" And I didn't say a word. And he told me the story. He said, "Yeah, it just seemed like he was trying to pull maybe their child off the road." And so I wrote that up. I bounced it off a prairie dog expert who said, "Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen stuff like that." And then a couple years later, I mean, I got a story from a woman in Utah who saw the same thing. So she wrote to me, she said, "This is what I saw. Then I discovered your article that you wrote about it." So that was really exciting too, that she had the presence of mind to stop, take notes, and find out if anybody else had ever done. So that was a favorite one. And some of the, do animals have a sense of humor? Dogs running around, showing something off, and then stopping like Jethro used to do and peering the room. I mean, I don't know if he was looking to see if other humans were paying attention to him, but I got the feeling that yes, he delighted in amusing them. Yeah.
I think it's great the way that the stories in the book, they're things you've seen yourself, and the fact that someone else would write in with a similar story, I think that's just wonderful. And you mentioned coyotes a moment ago, and you've studied carnivore behavior across different carnivores. You studied wolves as well. So I wanted to ask you if you can tell us something about your research on wild wolves.
Well, I never did much formal on them, although I've been with the wolves in Yellowstone and I'm involved in the wolf reintroduction disaster here. I'll stop there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I spent time in Yellowstone watching the wolves. Years ago, I was going to have a grad student work on them, but that didn't work out. But they, I don't know, it's hard to say anything more than when you have a pack of wolves and they are together, they know and feel what other animals in the group know and feel. And the person I go to now is Rick McIntyre. He's got a fifth book coming out called Thinking Like a Wolf. And his previous 4 books have been great. And so what I glean from Rick, and I was in the field with him some years ago, is that if you want to see similarities between wolves and dogs, because dogs came from a common wolf ancestor, they're there. I mean, that's not to say wolves are dogs or dogs are wolves. But for me, what it does from the dog point of view is to remind me, and it's something I remind other people, that dogs have wolf genes in them still, and they have wolf engrams in their brains. So there's a lot of evolutionary history within a dog. I mean, you wouldn't know that from dogs who weigh 4 pounds or maybe weigh 200 pounds, but there's very little difference ethologically between wolves and dogs in terms of their basic behavior patterns and the way that they fight or threaten one another, or take care of one another, which Rick has wonderful stories of empathy in the wild wolves.
Thank you.
So this book was a revision, and because this is a literary festival, and Zazie and I are always very interested in people's writing process, and I think revising is very different than writing something fresh. So what was your process for revising this work?
Well, the first process was the first day I sat down and reread the first edition and started writing the second one. I was looking for any and every excuse to get away from my computer and and resist writing my publisher and say, you know what, it's a good idea, but what I did do, and I really mean it, is I'm really organized. So I had a whole stack of stuff, of new stuff, and then I just started. I didn't work off of the manuscript that I had sent in 17 years ago because it just wasn't working for me. I know people can do that. I just started rewriting and it's reorganized too. Some of the chapters have the same titles or similar titles. But I was looking for new material that supported the old material. And just as, to break up sometimes the boredom of saying, well, of course we learn this. I would keep a chart, and a chart was new research, and in the left-hand column supports old research, supports old stories. New column doesn't. There was almost no entry in the new column. In other words, we didn't learn that dogs or cats or fishes or birds or lobsters, you name your animal, were, quote, less emotional, less sentient. Everything we learned fed into what I call the biodiversity of sentience, if you will, that these animals have very rich emotional lives and they are deeply and uniquely sentient. And that was the motivator. And it's not like if I found a study that would say, nah, you don't really have to worry about your dog, or a cat or a wolf, I wouldn't use it, but nothing was there. So that's how it was. And then, like I said, the manuscript, it went from being twice as long as it should be to about 50% as long. And I just threw up my hands and I said to my editor, Jason, I said, here it is. I said, you can go slice it up and cut it. I am not doing it anymore. There's too much exciting material. I mean, Zazie knows, and Chris, just all the stuff we're learning and have learned in the last 17 years. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's very powerful and it's amazing. And I think that's why it's so great that you did a second edition of this book. And I would like to remind everyone this is really something that should be on every animal lover's bookshelf. You definitely want to read it. But you're actually a very prolific writer, Mark. And one of the books you held up earlier was Jane Goodall at 90. You've worked a lot with Jane Goodall. Can you tell us about the book, Jane Goodall at 90?
Yeah. So when Jane turned 80, I did a book called The Jane Effect. And it was a collection of a couple of hundred essays, it turned out to be, to celebrate her birthday. And so I worked closely with Jane. I talked to her, we email a lot. And she was in Denver in March. God, this is 2024. Yeah, I'm not good on calendars. Yeah, so she was in Denver in March 2023, and she was turning 89. So we hung out a lot. And then I just got this idea. I'm talking to myself, let's just do a book to celebrate Jane's 90th birthday next year. And so I started outlining it, and I run the Jane Goodall Ethics Committee with a man named Koen Margot, who lives in Belgium, and he's a good friend, and he also works closely with Jane. So I said, Koen, let's do a book for Jane. It's 90th birthday, 90 essays, and let's really make it more intimate. Really, and so in the description of the book, it's really the real Jane. Jane often complains that people don't really understand that she's got wicked sense of humor, and she has a wicked sense of humor. And of course, she likes single malt scotch. There was even an article in the New York Times that had the scotch in the title, So it's nothing she's embarrassed about. So we collected essays from people who were on the ground with her in early, 64 years ago, and people who have really worked closely with her, and who know her. So that was the genesis for the book, and so there's 90 essays. We call them 90 candles. And we have essays from her son, Grub, Hugo von Leeuwenhoek Jr., and her grandchildren, Merlin and Angel and Nick. And Nick actually did some beautiful artwork. And Tom Mangelson, who's a world famous wildlife photographer, did the covers and then and provided a lot of photos, images. And we wanted it to be a surprise. And after 6 months of putting it together, we started realizing that I knew they could read English, but people started talking about the book. So right before New Year's of 2020, we've been 2023 to 2024. We put together a Zoom conference about ethics because we didn't want to give it away. So we said, okay, Jane, we need to talk to you at 7:00 your time, noon in Colorado, and whatever time. I guess it was 8:00 in Belgium. So Mary Lewis, who has been working with Jane for ages, and Tom joined, and Jane came down and said, so it's almost New Year's or something like that. What's so important about the ethics tonight? And so we had mailed a copy of the book to her sister, Judy, with whom she lives. I said, Judy, could you give Jane this package? And Jane's just ripping it open, and then she holds up the book. So she was surprised. And it was a really fun book to do, to be honest with you. And we've had a lot of positive responses because, Jane is just one of the most inspirational women I've ever met in my life. And I've worked really closely with her for years and still do. So that was it. If you read the book, you will learn a lot about who we call the real Jane. I'm not going to give anything more away. There's one great picture in here of her in South Dakota playing a prairie dog, and prairie dogs do what's called the jumping, yipping display. It's an alarm display, and Jane's doing one. And then there's some ample ones of I was playing tug of war with Jane and then sharing scotch. So, no.
That sounds like an amazing present for Jane and a great read for everybody else as well. So yeah, thank you for telling us about it. And I know that you've got a short reading that you're going to do for us now. So Christy and I will just go off off camera while you do the reading. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do some very short reading here because we've talked about stuff. And I'm going to have to put it under light, and I think you can see me. But I just wanted to write more about sentience in this book and summarize some different aspects of sentience. So I'm just going to read from, it's on page 4 to 5 of the book. Sentience simply means the capacity to feel. Philosophers can beat it around the bush and come to some conclusions that not even humans are sentient. I think all non-humans are. I'm not sure about all humans. Anyway, recognizing and acknowledging sentience among non-human animals, it's no longer radical. It's no longer radical to say that animals have feelings. And now we see their feelings in a wide range of emotions such as joy, sadness, grief, and so on. The important question is why sentience and emotions evolved, not among living beings, not if emotions evolved in some and not others. Skeptics no longer have a credible basis for blanket denials of sentience in non-human animals. We still have much to learn about sentience, and science is continually surprising us with evidence of sentience in unexpected species such as fishes, amphibians, reptiles, insects, crustaceans, and possibly even plants. And as a sideshow, I have a section on plant sentience in the introduction to the book. In other words, the more we study sentience, the more species we find who possess it, and we don't know all the forms it takes and ways it might be experienced. But once we recognize sentience in any species, it's important to use what we know on their behalf, and the knowledge that we get to the knowledge we get to make decisions about the well-being of that species, including all individuals. And talking about degrees of sentience makes little practical sense in regard to how we treat animals. An individual's pain is still pain, and it's their pain. While there are differences among species and difference among individuals of the same species, this does not mean that the suffering of certain animals is somehow less or doesn't count as much as the suffering of individuals and others. One of our biggest challenges today is aligning what we know about animal sentience and emotions with how we treat them. It is painful to acknowledge when we caused harm, but the only solution is change. Society's current animal welfare standards are extremely outdated and inadequate. So summing that up is, number one, we know a lot more about sentience now than we ever did. Number two, it's a useless question to ask whether dogs suffer more than ants. Or if you want to stick to the vertebrates, some people say, well, chickens don't suffer as much as dogs and other mammals. And I think they're wrong, because once again, the major message is that my pain is my pain, my joys are my joys. And it doesn't mean that if I express one more than you do, that I have it and you don't. So that's really the basic message. And related to the questions that were coming in before, that was another good reason to do the revision, is to get rid of these comparisons between species, which are fraught with difficulty and which often become very anthropocentric, that we're at the top, above and separate from other animals. So our pains and suffering and our joys count more than those of other individuals of other species.
Thank you. That's such an important message, and it's great to hear it in your voice as well. So thank you. And we've got time for audience questions. I've seen quite a few come in. I'm going to hand over to Christy to see how many questions we can answer.
It's okay. I'm in no hurry.
Yeah, we're getting a great mix of questions about specific dog stuff and then bigger topic questions. And the first two questions on the list are both sort of prefaced by this. I know this might be silly, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And I think it's sort of like it shows just how safe people feel here to ask these types of questions. So I wanted to acknowledge that. So someone asks that since the day that her former owner passed away, my Pomeranian has had a ritual of vigorously licking my eyes at least once a day. It seems to calm her. What might be her felt experience? She does this with a little extra scolding, grumbles if I'm crying. Should I be doing more to make her feel supported?
Wow.
It's a big question.
You know, I don't, I mean, I always say that I don't know exactly what she's feeling and I'm not there. So I'm just, I don't know. I mean, if you're crying and there's a taste to the tears, she could be smelling your stress on you. So I don't know, but one of my bumper stickers, I mean, within reason, and sometimes I think I step outside the bounds of reason. If your dog likes doing something, let him do it, as long as it's not harming them or you, obviously. So, I mean, it's a great question, but it also shows that the dog might be just expressing an emotion differently from other dogs, or the way they would express it, just because they can and they feel safe with you to do so.
Andrea asks, when comparing emotions in companion animals and free-living animals, is there a difference in how they express their emotions? Which I also think is a super fascinating question.
Yeah, it is. Not really. I mean, the way in which an individual dog, say dog, wolf, coyotes, I'll stick to members of the dog family, express their emotions overtly, depends a lot on context, who they're interacting with, where they are. Are they on their own turf? Are they off their own turf? It's called the residency effect. But the basic expressions are the same. When I constructed early ethograms of wolves, dogs, coyotes, wolf dog hybrids, and wolf coyote hybrids, the basic actions are the same. You might find subtle differences, but there was nothing that really stuck out that differentiated the members of the dog family. Same with jackals, who are also a canis, genus. So basically, I think the way that a dog or their wild relatives would express their emotions would be the same as how you and I, the three of us, or all of you who are watching, and others, there's a basic element of grief where you might withdraw, you might just show the grief, you might smell, you might be putting out an odor of grief. And the same with play, you're feeling relaxed, you're feeling exuberant, you really want to play with another individual. So I think the basic expressions, like a play bow, might be the same, but the way in which it's performed, or when it's performed, or when you display grief, might differ depending on context. And it's what I love about that question, because one of the main messages of Dogs Demystified, and one of the main messages in the emotional lives of animals, is the importance of context. Who you are, who the other animal is, could be a human, where it's happening, how you're feeling individually. Did you have a good night of sleep? Did you have any nightmares? Did you have a bad dream? Or did you wake up just welcoming the world? And I think one of the big things for future research, at least I'm hearing from people, is how the importance of context. So the basic elements are there if you look at the different actions in the ethogram, but after that, it just can become a kaleidoscope depending on who's doing what.
So this next question is also, I think, wonderful. Cricket says, I wonder if my dog can feel how much I love him. It's so important to me. I see his enthusiastic affection and love for those of us who love him. But do you think he can feel our love for him?
Well, I don't know what's going on, in their head, but yes, I do think they can. I really do. Once again, they could see it, they could hear it in your voice, and I do believe they could sense it olfactorily. And ethologists talk about what we call composite signals. So they're a cocktail of input from, say, visual, auditory, and olfactory sources, but it could also be in your gait. It could also be how you hug them or touch them, just like with another human being. So, and they're so aware, as we know, of the little nuances, that I can't remember the details, but there was a study that was telling people they were angry before the people even knew they were angry, and things like that. So I'm not saying that they can. I don't know how to put it in words, but they can feel the safety and the love. And, I also think that, I mean, I'm preaching to the converted with all of you, but, if you're hugging your dog, you're sitting there and they're nestling closer and closer, unless they're master food, like all my dogs were, unless they're trying to get a piece of your food, they just want more contact comfort. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's like with people, just, and one of my dogs used to love to spoon, especially if I'd be lying down on the ground, like doing exercises or watching TV. And I just finally decided that that's what made them feel comfortable. I had no idea why. I would ask them, why are you doing it? And the only verbal response I could imagine them trying to say is, because I like it and I like you. And I'm saying, fine. I would say to myself, Mark, don't beat this to death. They just want more of you. And that's just fine. Whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy asks, she doesn't understand her dog. After a series of big life changes, her dog started humping and mounting her other dogs at the age of 4. And she was wondering, why did he wait until he was 4? Why did this pop out at 4? So
I don't know, but I've had a few people say that. I just don't know. I'd have to know what is it, Kathy, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good example of context. And maybe, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just something the dog enjoys and makes them feel good. And if the other dogs don't care, when you go to dog parks, or like when I lived in the mountains, I mean, humping and mounting are 2 dog appropriate behaviors. They do it. They just do it not only reproductively, and 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 when it's done and they both enjoy it, that's great. But every now and again, and we've all seen this in our dogs, and I'm sure many of your listeners have too, they just don't like it. It may be because they're being grasped and they feel that their movement is limited. They can't escape. They can't get away. I don't know if they are impugning sexual, intentions. One of my dogs did not like being grasped from behind or hugged from behind. I don't know why. She was a rescued dog. So I didn't do it. And anytime a dog tried to jump her, even during play, when they had a real good play mood going on, and a dog would jump from behind and maybe mount or clasp her, she just did not like it. So one day I sat down and I said, Claire, would you just tell me what's going on? And she just looked at me like, you humans have no idea what I'm thinking or feeling. But it was really clear she didn't like it. So I don't know. Yeah.
Irina asks, I would be very interested in knowing more on empathy across species. I know of unusual animal friends. Do we know how animals from different species understand each other? How do they show empathy? How do they communicate across species boundaries?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm not sure anybody really has the answer to that. You have the lioness with an oryx in Africa years ago. I don't know at all. I think it could be, once again, that they're picking up visual cues, a change in gait, a change in posture. I always, it could be that they hear sounds that we don't hear. And once again, I think it can be odor. I mean, I don't know. I mean, one of the examples I use it's not necessarily related to this question, but I think it's a really important one is, and I write about it in the book, bank voles who live in the banks of the River Thames have a play pheromone. And Susan Wilson learned about this decades ago in her research. So I used to be asked, do you think dogs have play pheromones when they, I don't know, maybe they do, so once again, there could be a sorrow or an empathy pheromone. But what I love about that question is, and I may be wrong here, and I'll put it out, maybe someone in the audience could correct me. I think dogs and other animals are really good at reading the positive emotions. Oh, you want to play? Let's just go play and hump and bite and wrestle. I actually think also they're very good at picking up cues of a dog or another animal isn't doing well. They may be sad. They may be, grieving. They may need help. They may need support. They may just need a hug, however they might hug. And I think that it could be olfactory. And in the world of dogs, no one has ever done the study, and I don't know how you would, to see whether there would be a play, or I might call a prosocial pheromone. I don't know. But once again, if they want it and you can give it to them, give them all you can, and don't worry about spoiling them. It's not all about you.
So we only have 1 minute, so I'm going to ask you one very quick last question, and then Zazie has some closing remarks. So Melissa asks, will you, Marc, be speaking or appearing anywhere in Colorado this year?
I don't think so. I don't know. I don't mean that. A lot of big events have just gone online. And Colorado, it might not be unlike, it might be similar all over. Colorado's got a lot of COVID going on. Boulder does. I know I have a lot of friends, and so a lot of those events are not going to happen. But if anybody wants to know, you can feel free to email me, and if I am, I will let you know. I work really closely with the governor and the first gentleman, and we do events at the governor's mansion. And if you let me know you're in Colorado, I can let you know if and when there's an event.
I guess related to that, Marc, is how do people get on your email list? Because you send a lot of things out on your email list.
Well, I've 2 groups. One's a Google group on cognition, emotions, and compassionate conservation, and you could join that, or I can add you to it, or you can join it online. My tech skills are nil. My stuffed animals have better tech skills than I do, but or you can ask me. And then I do have a little. Well, it's grown to a couple of hundred people. I just call it my dog list. So you can email me because I have to add you to that list. But everything I send to the dog list goes to the Google group, but not vice versa. So
people can add themselves to the Google group. So
but if you can't, just write me. It's easy to do.
Okay. Well, I feel so lucky that we've been able to talk to you again at BarkFest. I've got some closing comments before we go. So a reminder to the audience that the recording will go out in about 72 hours with the link to the recording. Someone who is here live is going to win a copy of The Emotional Lives of Animals, which is absolutely wonderful. The first edition was such an important book, and this second edition is even more important. It's just an incredible book, as well as a copy of Dogs Demystified. And if you missed hearing Marc talk about that last week, you'll be able to get the recording. You can still sign up for that on my website. And a copy of my book, Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful, or Reactive Dog, which is published on the 1st of October. And Marc, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for coming and talking to us and sharing so much wisdom. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again and to hear your reading as well. It's been so much fun and so interesting to learn more about animal emotions. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Yeah, I can't put in words how much gratitude I have. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's here. Yeah, really.
And
my heart.
Yeah.
I failed anatomy when I was in undergrad over here.
Well, thank you. I'm sure it's touched all of us as well. So thank you. Thank you to Christy for being a wonderful co-host. Thank you to my publisher for some help behind the scenes as well. Thank you to my husband for tech support so that we could get all these sessions off the ground. And thank you so much to the audience for coming. It's been an absolutely wonderful session, and it's great to see how engaged the audience is and what brilliant questions you ask as well. So thank you. And most of all, thank you, Marc. It's just been wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Positive Posting Conversation. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and write us a review via your podcast app. For the show notes, visit companionanimalpsychology.com. This show was produced by Zazie Todd. The music is Melody from Paris by Studio Le Bousse. See you next time.